Hello friends. In my last Tears of the Kingdom video, we discussed the potential settings and gameplay structures of dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom. The more I dwell on this subject though, the more one particular thing keeps standing out to me. The two locations I personally felt to be the strongest candidates for fulfilling that quote-unquote dungeon role were within these cave networks and above Hyrule on the floating islands. Now I still think that Nintendo is rethinking dungeon conventions in a way, and that dungeons may not be immediately recognizable as dungeons or as the dungeons of old, but I still think that these two settings, caves and floating islands, will fulfill these roles. Or in other words, below the earth and in the sky. Now, while I typically focus on level design, I love me some lore. The Zelda series is rich with it, but the earth and sky just kept bouncing around in my head. So for today's topic, I wanted to look at what the lore implications of having these dungeon settings could be. Let's hop right into it, shall we? Most classic Zelda games have taken a very hands-off approach when it comes to their dungeon settings. For example, to this day, we don't have a definitive canon answer for the existence of the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time. Only theories. Lots of good theories, but still theories. However, some games in recent years have been a little more upfront with us in this department. Skyward Sword had a healthy mixture of both, but for the most part, we knew the reasons for these dungeons existing. Lanayru Mining Facility, for example, is a mining facility where the ancient robots refined the timeshift stones that were cultivated in the surrounding area. The Sand Ship is a vessel whose crew was tasked with protecting the sacred Nehru's flame. You get the idea. For the most part, there is far less mystery about these places. Still some wiggle room for theories, but not usually an outright mystery. Breath of the Wild, on the other hand, is the most upfront with us regarding its dungeon origins. The four divine beasts were created 10,000 years ago by the Sheikah as part of an anti-Ganon army. They were successfully used by the Hyrulean forces to defeat Ganon, with a princess and hero to lead the charge. 100 years before Breath of the Wild, the Hylian royal family sought to follow in their ancestors' footsteps and use the same weapons that had protected the kingdom before. However, as we know, this did not go according to plan, and Ganon was able to commandeer these massive machines along with the Guardians and essentially wipe out nearly all their opposition in Hyrule. This is all told to us in-game pretty explicitly, and we're tasked with purging the blights from within these divine beasts. It's a great story, one I'm fond of, and though I've expressed my gripes with certain redundancies within the theming and gameplay, it's serviceable overall. But Tears of the Kingdom as a sequel has the chance to do better, and following the trend that these games have set up, there is a very real chance that the dungeons here will have just as much story significance as those found in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. This isn't to say that the dungeons of classic games have no story impact, but they're more so backdrops for the interesting gameplay first and foremost, and story elements second. The divine beasts are kind of the opposite in my view. That said, if the dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom are to pack the same punch as the dungeons of old, to have the same sort of impact, what does the setting of Earth and Sky have to do with that? Well, maybe I'm connecting dots that aren't there, but let's rewind a bit. If the various trailers and teasers have indicated anything to us, it's that an important facet of this story may center around repairing the Master Sword. It's likely that early on in the game, the sword gets damaged by malice and ends up in this ruined state. And if we have any hope of defeating Ganondorf, who seems to be the most powerful we've ever seen him, we'll need to not only restore the sword, but perhaps even upgrade it beyond its original power. power. Something to consider here is that Link may have to retrace the sword's steps, so to speak, in order to do that. That may include investigating these Sky Islands to discover the sword's origins, which nowadays is well known to us as players, but there's a chance it's not something that may be as well known to the denizens of Hyrule at this point. I mean, by the time of Breath of the Wild, that sword is ancient, like well over 10,000 years old ancient. We don't know for sure, but 10,000 is the literal bare minimum. Breath of the Wild is so far flung forward in the timeline that the events of the entire rest of the series are basically a footnote in the history of Hyrule called the Era of Myth. So who is to say that Link knows how the sword was created? Enough time has to have passed between the Era of Myth for Hyrule to have become a technologically advanced civilization to hit the events of 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild even. So with so much of the history of the world obscured by myth and legend, who is to say that Link knows how the sword was actually created in the first place? It just may be his quest to revive the sword that takes him up to the sky. And this would make a fantastic callback to Skyward Sword, which, may I remind you, was the game deliberately chosen as our holdover HD re-release title between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Of course, we know the Master Sword actually wasn't always the Master Sword. It was a blade initially wielded by the goddess Hylia and left behind for her chosen hero. That hero, the hero of the sky, comes upon the blade within the goddess statue of Skyloft, which is of course a floating island in the sky. At this time, he and Zelda have been separated and sent on two parallel quests. Zelda explores the surface in order to awaken divine memories and powers that stir within her. Link, on the other hand, after being led on a bit of a wild goose chase, must temper both his own spirit as well as the sword itself. By bathing the goddess sword in 3 sacred flames possessing the powers of the golden goddesses, the hero of the sky forges the Master Sword. All the while, his companion and spirit of the sword echoes a prophecy that Zelda herself unknowingly told us at the beginning of the game. O youth, guided by the servant of the goddess, unite earth and sky. Bring light to the land. Link in Skyward Sword does this somewhat literally, but also figuratively. After Link unites the Triforce, the people of Skyloft would settle on this surface and form the Kingdom of Hyrule. But let's rewind a bit. Zelda's quest, meanwhile, would take her to 2 important locations, the Skyview and Earth Springs, where praying in front of the goddess statues would awaken those sacred memories within her. As it turns out, those memories are of her past life, as she is the literal reincarnation of the goddess Hylia. It's implied that it's these very same springs that her descendants, like the Zelda of Breath of the Wild, would pray at to awaken their inherited divine powers. So the Skyview Spring and Earth Spring, uniting Earth and Sky. So the elements of Earth and Sky certainly have their importance to the origins of the Master Sword, and that importance does not end there within Skyward Sword. Further down in the timeline, it is revealed that the sword's power is something that needs at least some degree of maintaining. Following the timeline split at the end of Ocarina of Time, when Ganondorf plans for his return to the surface world in The Wind Waker, the first thing he does is make a move to gut the power of the one sword capable of causing him harm, the Master Sword. He does this by assassinating the sages of the Earth and Wind temples, wind being an element closely associated with the sky, so when our hero of winds extracts the blade, it is in an underpowered state. Our hero must then awaken new sages to take the places of their ancestors and continue to pray at the Earth and Wind temples in order to restore the power of the Master Sword. So not only are the elements of Earth and Sky significant to the origins of the Master Sword, but as some sort of reverence, sages presumably paying homage to those origins, must maintain the sword's power. Now, by the time of Breath of the Wild, we have no indication that such sages are still around and performing these duties, which could very well be a lore reason for why the sword quite literally gets exhausted and needs to recharge if used too much. And this, of course, brings us forward to Tears of the Kingdom again. Assuming that Link may be on a quest to restore the blade or even improve it further, that would give us a very good reason to go up to the sky again. There's a good chance we do not find Skyloft up there. In fact, I really don't think it's likely, or at least not in the shape we know it. But several races over the years have actually taken up residency in the sky, such as the Wind Tribe and the Uka, both being said to have ascended from the surface up to the sky after the formation of the Kingdom of Hyrule. There may be scraps of their civilization still up there, fragments of history that our hero can piece together to retrace the origins of the blade, and with any luck, discover a way to restore it. With at least one of the elements we need found in the sky, that of course leaves us also needing to explore the Earth. And these vast cave networks may just serve as the backdrop for whatever dungeon or gameplay scenario leads us to those MacGuffins. I don't think it's out of the question that new sages need to be sought after or awakened, but there's a chance that we may be hunting sacred flames or finding master ore or something completely new. Regardless, if my deductions in the last video about dungeons being found among sky islands or deep below ground are true, then it would make for the perfect tie-in to these classic story elements. Or I could be completely wrong. And that is my final point. I could be so way off base, because this is all speculative. The truth is that Breath of the Wild set out to break conventions and have us rethink the series' tropes and staples. While shaking up the gameplay and dungeon formula was certainly achieved in Breath of the Wild, the lore is not off the table either. Now, I'm not saying that they'll outright retcon things, although that has happened before too, but I do feel that there is a good chance that the story will have no callbacks whatsoever, and instead be focused on something entirely new. I'm so on the fence because one part of me feels that they're throwing it all to the side to explore fresh and interesting ideas, but some part of me knows that with Fujibayashi at the helm, the man who loves making games about crafting swords, that there's just as good a chance that we're in for a lore deep dive and a story like we've never seen before. And now I'd like to turn over the conversation to you guys again. What do you guys think about this potential lore connection to the Master Sword here? Or do you think I'm way off base this time? Please, of course, let me know down below in the comments, and thank you all so much for the support. All the comments on the last video were so lovely to read, and I appreciate how everybody has been so respectful, even if they disagree with what I was saying. It's just been really great to read through all of those. So I want to say thank you all so much for watching, and remember, as always, to hype responsibly. Thank you all so much for watching. Before we end this off, I just wanted to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon or here on YouTube as a channel member, including but not limited to Grey Mage, Brenda, Tetra, Callie, Gail, Hylian West, Justin, Clifford Longhead, Midnight Naomi, and Bunny. Thank you all so much for the support and for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.